I'll be honest and I'll say that one consistent theme that I see in economic policy generally, but particularly in Canada, is that policy is not made with consumers' interests in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Consumers are always kind of the last to be considered when it comes to economic policy.
Yeah.
Policy is almost always made on the basis of, particular industrial constituents, whether they're producers or workers, sometimes one and the same thing. But the trade-offs in terms of how things that might benefit producers and workers in certain industries, in this case, dairy and eggs, the trade-offs in terms of how those benefits also come at the expense of consumers, really, this is just something that is not acknowledged by the political class, by the media. It is kind of another disheartening thing to me.
Yeah, I'm with you with that. Disheartening. I'm really pleased to welcome back to the show somebody who's doing a good job on all of our behalf. Joseph Steinberg. He's a researcher at the National Bureau of Economic Research, also, U of T economics professor. Joseph, thanks for finding time for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me back once again, Mike.
Well, there's no shortage of things to talk about, so I'm going to just start and just fire in all sorts of things. It's like the ghost of Barbara Walters has invaded my body. But I want to start with the pullback on retaliatory tariffs. I'm proud to say I opposed them from the get-go. I asked, we should be questioning them. That was the first thing I said, is why aren't we discussing this, because it's never worked in the past. Then I went on to they didn't use research. And you were on top of that right away. You were bringing that forward, and so I guess you're pleased with that move.
Yeah, I'm absolutely pleased with that move. It's the right move. I've been, ever since Trump first started talking about levying tariffs on Canada and Mexico as well, all the way back in January, February, I've been pretty consistently writing and commenting about what I think is the folly of retaliation for a country that is in our position.
Yeah.
China's in a different position. China has a much more leverage vis-a-vis the United States, and I can see an argument that they might want to retaliate along some dimensions. But for us, we're a small country, heavily reliant on trade with the United States. When we put in retaliatory tariffs, that pain is primarily felt on our side, not on the U.S. side. And so it's just counterproductive. It just exacerbates the economic pain that the tariffs that President Trump has put in place, the pain that those tariffs have on our economy. Doesn't really have any other effect. And so, yeah, I'm pleased to see that the Carney government has ended up taking away these retaliatory tariffs.
I found the whole context of the discussion was ill-advised in this way. If we canceled all, let's stand up to Trump and we're not going to do any trade with the U.S. Oh, good. That hurts them by 2.8% or so of their economy and 37% of ours. It's just such a worrisome thing. And yet, I looked at I forget which polling company put it out a couple of days ago, saying the vast majority of Canadians still support retaliatory tariffs. So they're not the ones who are losing their jobs, by the way, but retaliatory tariffs. And I'm going, holy smokes. I mean, I don't know where to go with that one.
It's a little disheartening. I agree. I don't know where to go with that one either. And, in many cases, it is actually the people who are being most affected in terms of their employment, or at least the representatives of those people. If you go out there and look at what people like Lana Payne, the head of Unifor, is saying about retaliatory tariffs, I mean, she's all on board with that, with retaliation.
Yeah.
And I know that she personally is not going to lose her job, but many of her constituents, who work in the auto industry are being hurt by this. I have family down in Windsor. Windsor is getting hit really hard by this stuff. And the retaliatory tariffs aren't helping. It's making it worse, if anything.
Well, I just think it was, I said, again, I'm not hindsighting on this. I looked at it and said, we should be down there explaining to Americans what Trump's tariffs are doing to them. They're going to act in self-interest. I couldn't figure out there was a single person in America who's going, gee, those are hurting Canadians. I'm kind of worried about that. No, I just think the political leadership on this has been demonstrably brutal. And they've sort of admitted this. Now I can throw in their face that Dominic LeBlanc has said very clearly this makes negotiations easier. Prime Minister Carney has said the same. Said he talked to President Trump and they asked him, will this help negotiations? And President Trump said yes. So, they're saying it was counterproductive.
Yeah, look, there's no denying it is counterproductive. And I understand very deeply the frustration that a lot of
Mhm.
Canadians have with this when they say, well, look, it's the United States that went and broke
Yep.
the rules of the USMCA in the first place. They went in and put these tariffs on, and that is, they did violate the rules of that agreement. But we kind of have to take that as given, and it's
Yep.
okay to be angry about it.
Yep.
But I don't think we ought to let that anger cloud our thinking about what is the economically rational way to respond to this.
Mhm. And
That's the way that I try to think about it.
well, and I guess I'm disappointed, although this has been confirmed by several people going back on different subjects. So much of our policy is not informed by research. I mean, all you have to do is do a quick search to see what's the result of retaliatory tariffs. And there's a lot of US research very critical of their tariffs hurting their people, but going back to 218, 219, some of those studies. I'm just saying, wow, when you're not doing research-based policy and you're doing emotion-based policy, not a lot of good things are going to happen. Whether I'm looking at an investment, should I invest in X, Y, or Z, or, economic policy.
Yeah, that's right. And what you just said, I think strikes home with me a lot, which is that the tariffs on the U.S. side are not being made on the basis of any kind of economic research
No.
as well. Especially what you just mentioned, the research on the tariffs in the first Trump administration.
Yeah.
The steel tariffs that he put in place then, they boosted steel employment by about 10,000 jobs. Guess what? They reduced employment in the rest of the U.S. manufacturing sector by about 100,000 jobs, 10 times more. So it's completely counterproductive.
Well, I'm
So they're
blown
making
away.
policy on the basis of nonsense, but that doesn't mean that we should be making our
No,
policy in response
absolutely.
to that on the basis of nonsense as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm blown away how the Trump administration is still pushing that we've raised $1 billion or $100 billion or whatever their numbers. And I'm going, yeah, did you mention who's paying for it? I mean,
Well,
and I'm disappointed in many members of the media who haven't even, Trump started talk tariffs in November. It didn't put them on, but I meant that has been a topic of conversation. Remember back in December, Canada said we're going to do something about the fentanyl trade, but that was over tariffs. So it's not like it hasn't been out there. And I said, for goodness sakes, take 10 minutes and read a little bit about what a tariff is. And they're getting away with it. And again, I'm astounded when that line continues to get peddled that somehow we're forgetting to tell you in the States, you're paying for the Trump tariffs. Yeah.
Yeah, the media, I think on both sides of the border hasn't done a terribly good job of that. I would also say that, the media here in Canada has not done a great job of, I think, pushing back against, up until just this past week or so, the, kind of the government's stated claims about the merits of our retaliatory tariffs as well. But, you're absolutely right. Who pays for tariffs? It's the people that buy the imported products. And I think, what really struck me as well, months ago when, before Carney came into office, we went down to the United States and we paid for billboards all across the United States saying that Trump's tariffs are a tax on American consumers. It's 100% true.
Yes.
And then we come here at home and we levy retaliatory tariffs on imports from the United States. That logic goes both ways. Right.
Well, another area that you've done some great work in is supply management, and starting with pointing out that it costs Canadian consumers, the most impacted are the poor, whatever, 133,000 estimate to 190,000 getting pushed into poverty. And again, how rare that side of the conversation in that whole supply management that all parties signed off on, that we're not going to negotiate it, and I'm going, these guys aren't representing the best interest of consumers.
No, I mean, I'll be honest and I'll say that one consistent theme that I see in economic policy generally, but particularly in Canada, is that policy is not made with consumers' interests in mind. Consumers are always kind of the last to be considered when it comes to economic policy. Yeah. Policy is almost always made on the basis of, particular industrial constituents, whether they're producers or workers, sometimes one and the same thing. But the trade-offs in terms of how things that might benefit producers and workers in certain industries, in this case, dairy and eggs, the trade-offs in terms of how those benefits also come at the expense of consumers, really, this is just something that is not acknowledged by the political class, by the media. It is kind of another disheartening thing to me.
Yeah, I'm with you with that. Disheartening. Let me come to the tariffs on EVs and the EV industry. And there's several aspects I want to talk about, but I'll start with
Yeah.
this. It seems to me we are protecting a fledgling industry that was made up by government, and they, created the demand at the expense of the canola industry, which I've talked about on this show, which is $43 billion a year. I'm flabbergasted in that.
Yeah, I mean, it is very obvious that the liberal government has a long-standing interest in promoting,
Mm-hmm.
the car industry in general, but especially trying to get an EV industry up and running. And in the last year or so, or even 2 years, this goal has really been running up against, I think, what turned out to be a massive shortfall, at least temporarily. And we'll see how this plays out over the medium to longer term. But a big shortfall, and I think the demand for these vehicles that they expected here in
Yes.
North America. There are other places around the world that are doing, where uptake of electric vehicles has grown a lot more. In Europe, electric vehicles are a much bigger share of total vehicle sales. This is also true in Asia as well, especially places like Vietnam that have access to the cheap and apparently high quality vehicles being produced by China.
Yeah.
You know, electric vehicles are selling like hotcakes there. And in some cases, this kind of reminds this. It almost looks like many consumers in these poor countries are kind of just jumping right to the electric vehicle market rather than even they go from nothing or a motorbike. They're just skipping ice cars entirely and going straight
Yeah.
to electric vehicles. This is something that you see a lot. As poor countries develop, they kind of just jump to frontier technologies, whereas more mature industries, there's kind of a lot more hysteresis in terms of where they're going to be at in terms of adoption of these things. But in any case, yeah, this is. I look at this and I see what is Canada's comparative advantage. I'm a trade economist. I look at this stuff and I see
Yes.
we are the best producer of canola in the world, right? We have, some of the best farmland to produce that. We've got a ton of it. We do a great job of producing it. It's not clear to me that it makes a whole lot of economic sense to sacrifice that industry, which exists and currently produces a lot of economic value, for a much shakier prospect. And again, it's shakier in terms of the economic future of this, at least in the short term. But also, it's not clear to me that this is something that Canada has a comparative advantage in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. You'd get an experienced portfolio manager in the same way. They'd say, you don't sell your winners to protect your losers. They're losers for that reason. And I'm not saying, and they have had a lot of bumps in the EV. And I know that people put out that, as you were saying, but I look at Norway, for example, and their EV adoption without people mentioning, are you kidding? Can you imagine the level of subsidies they're providing for that industry in so many, like you avoid this tax and that tax, a rolled toll, they're basically paying you. And I think people would adopt a huge amount of EVs if they were free.
I mean,
But I'll come back to the protection of that industry. If they wanted to have it adopted, they literally wouldn't have 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, because, as you say, around the world they're selling like hotcakes and they're about half the price of what Canada's charging. If they want adoption, price has an important role to play.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you have to look at the combined policies that we've put in place and tease out what's really the goal. Is the goal really actually getting consumers to adopt EVs to reduce emissions, or is the goal to promote the production of electric vehicles?
Mm-hmm.
It's very clearly the latter. Mm-hmm. It's not the former. As you said, these Chinese EVs, they're cheap. They seem to be pretty high quality. I was down in Mexico earlier in the year, in the summer, and I hadn't been down to Mexico City for a couple of years. And it was shocking how many of these Chinese EVs there are around the city. These things literally didn't exist 5 years ago. And now they're absolutely everywhere. And they're obviously, a particularly attractive option for people in poor countries. But, for Canadians as well, it seems like a great option if our goal is to get people to drive EVs. That said, the other thing you mentioned Norway. One of the big differences between us and Norway is that if you want people to be willing to buy these things, the infrastructure has to be there, right? Norway and Europe in general, I think, has done a much better job of promoting
Yeah.
and indirectly subsidizing the production of the production, adoption, installation of all of the charging infrastructure that's necessary to get these things to work kind of seamlessly within a country.
Yeah.
And Canada, a huge country like Canada, obviously it's pretty challenging. But if you look at like the infrastructure that we've got in Toronto here, I mean, it's just pretty sad when you compare it to the infrastructure in any kind of random European town. You rent a car, go on a road trip around Europe, you know, to be quite frank, renting an electric car there actually works quite well. Here, you know, it's a big challenge.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you kind of have to, the infrastructure has to be there before the demand for, you know, purchasing the vehicles is going to be there.
That's my challenge, though, is so much of this stuff, I'm not debating climate change or EVs or any of that. I can't even get there because there's so many practical considerations before that policy would become reality. I know they're going to stick with it. They've said they are going to stick with it. But, you know, there is the infrastructure that we have to have, including grid infrastructure, as well as the charging station. But then why would you remove the, rebates? Why would you remove the rebates if you're trying to encourage people to drive? And I'm going, that is, again, counterproductive.
With that one in particular, I'm a little bit cynical that has something to do with personal animus towards Elon Musk and Tesla specifically. Oh, okay. You know, I think everybody up here was pretty mad at Elon Musk at the beginning, you know, for his role in the kind of beginning of the Trump administration. And I think part of this was just about fighting back against him. You know, here in Canada, I think the vast majority of electric vehicles sold are Teslas. I could be wrong about that, but certainly they're a huge chunk.
Yeah.
And I think part of this was just taking away the subsidies that end up flowing to Elon Musk's company.
There's a couple.
I could be wrong. I'm a cynic, and I'm kind of cynical sometimes.
Well, you know what? I think we should be thinking critically of everything. I mean, governments, and I'm not blaming the current Liberal government, I'm saying governments in general, have a tendency to play fast and loose with the truth, and, you know, other motivations do enter into it. So I think we do need our sort of critical thinking caps on nonstop within that. I want to talk about two other things. Coming up, Victor Adair's going to chat with me. We'll talk a little bit more, but about the Trump interference in the Federal Reserve. I see that as a big deal, like a really big deal. You know, so, you know, if you want to have hyperinflation, just have the government take over the money printing. You know, so just your quick take on that.
I agree. It's pretty concerning. Every economist knows that central bank independence is an absolutely critical piece of having a well-functioning economy and being able to maintain a low and stable inflation rate. If you look around the world, I mean, there's all the research on central bank independence says that when the government attacks it, there's research on, you know, Turkey that I just read a couple of days ago. There's literally a research paper that says when the leader of Turkey removes one of the governors of the Turkish central bank, inflation in Turkey goes up. Right? And the reason that inflation goes up is not only because the leader of the country, in the case of the United States, President Trump, is able to, you know, get the Fed to directly lower interest rates, which kind of is going to mechanically push inflation up. But the bigger problem is about the credibility that the central bank has. You know, credibility is absolutely the crucial thing for keeping inflation low and stable, right? I mean, it's about anchoring people's expectations for where inflation is going to be in the medium and the long run. If people they simply don't believe that the central bank has credibility to keep inflation low, rising inflation ends up being a self-fulfilling phenomenon, regardless of whether the interest rates fall or not. And so it is really absolutely critical that the central bank is able to maintain credibility, and central bank independence is absolutely the core of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think they are really playing with fire, and I don't see any indication that President Trump understands interest rates and the term structure of interest rates. You know, he thinks maybe if the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates. Well, that's going to not impact mortgage rates. That's not going to impact the 10-year bond rate unless it pushes it up. I mean, but yeah, I don't think he shows me any understanding that he understands there are differences, when you look at the term structure of interest rates. So it's like a bit of a head shaker. I don't think this ends anywhere good, by the way.
No, by the way, I mean, this is also just going to exacerbate, one of the other kind of bigger trends over the past couple of months in the United States is the depreciation of the dollar.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That goes hand in hand with increasing inflation expectations. The dollar has lost a lot of value over the past couple of months. That's, honestly, one of the biggest things that is going to cause living standards to fall in the United States and cause everything to get more expensive. It's not just about the tariffs. Part of the depreciation of the dollar is, I think, driven by the tariffs, of course, but the broader, package of policies that President Trump has put in place has simply caused everything from around the world to get more expensive for Americans. And this attack on central bank independence is going to just make that even worse.
Let's finish off by coming back to Canada here. It's a real simple question. Scale of 1 to 10, what's your level of confidence that we are going to unleash our resources from oil and gas? I know Prime Minister Carney talked a lot about critical minerals, just did it again in Germany. And I'm saying there's no infrastructure for that. Like, let's get real. A mine takes 25 years to go from, discovery to production. Maybe we can get it down to 15 years, but there still, even if you did, there's no infrastructure, especially as we've talked about in this show with Jeff Stibbard. There's no infrastructure in the Arctic, so they can talk about Churchill and that. There's just so much work to do. But do you think they are going to start? I mean, really meaningfully start?
I think it's hard to say what meaningfully start means, because I guarantee you, they said the major projects office is supposed to open imminently. And I guarantee you that opening is going to be coupled with an announcement of some already predetermined projects that are kind of, they've already got in place. And so we're going to see a flurry of announcements about specific projects and money even being allocated towards those projects. But yes, when it comes to, shovels in the ground, actual physical creation of the infrastructure needed, I don't think we're going to see any progress in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, would be my guess. I could be wrong.
I still think their challenge is they can't attract capital investment. I mean, what is the old expression, once burned, twice shy or something? Well, it's about 27 times shy. I mean, I would think, in fact, it would be reneging on their fiduciary duty to step forward without a lot of legislative guarantees. If I'm Enbridge, for example, or the old interprovincial pipe, I mean, all of those things. I still think that's a huge challenge, especially when it comes to oil and gas.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is, I saw some articles just a couple of weeks ago about Enbridge, stating that, look, we see all these announcements, but still we're ramping down investments in Canada and actually increasing our investments in the United States.
Yeah.
Based on what we perceive to be the kind of near to medium term policy environment. My view on all of this major project stuff is that the Carney government is going about this the wrong way. It's a continuation of the way that things worked, I think, in a way under the Trudeau government, even though ostensibly, the kind of friendliness towards these projects has grown a lot. But it's precisely this term major projects is what bothers me. It's this picking and choosing, trying to pick specific projects that we intend to be winners, fostering those specific projects, trying to shepherd them through our complicated, permitting system. I just fundamentally believe that that's the wrong way to go about it. And that's precisely, as you mentioned, that is part of the reason that attracting private sector capital to these projects is difficult. The right way to go about this is to set the rules of the game so that things are much clearer in general for all projects. And let the private sector determine which projects ought to be the winners.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm kind of cynical about this is I look at, Prime Minister Carney and his record as, a very successful, investment manager. His experience is all about picking specific winners in a sense. And so it's perhaps not surprising that he looks at that experience and says, yeah, I know how to do this. I'm going to do this at the, the national level as well. And I'm going to pick a specific project. And I have confidence that he'd probably do a better job of that than, say, his predecessor. But nevertheless, I think it is the wrong way to go about these projects. predetermined major projects. That's the wrong way to go. The right way to go is set the rules of the game so that the private sector is incentivized to go out and find these projects and fund them on their own. So that's about, obviously lower taxes on corporate income, much more aggressive, deductions for capital expenditures that mirror what we've seen in under the TCJA, and now more recently the new OBBB in the United States. We've got to be much more aggressive about making private sector investment, just make sense economically.
It's such an important point you're making. Two sides is that it's a competitive marketplace. Where am I going to put my capital? And then secondly, did you create the, I don't like the picking of winners because I don't like how government's track record. Do I have to go further than let's put some money in the Northvolt EV factory? And what was it? Within 12 months, they're bankrupt. I mean, they do not have a good track record. And by the way, if they did, those people would be in private industry. If you had that level of expertise and a track record like that, there is no way you're working in the federal government in the finance department. You are working for several hedge funds or whatever because you got a magic wand there. So, yeah, I'm uncomfortable. There's so many things we could talk about, and that's what I love to say and trick you and say we got to visit again in the near future. And I know
Absolutely.
You're going back. You're starting class in 2 days. You've got your plate full. So please know how much we appreciate you joining us here.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun as always. I'm happy to come back anytime.
Well, that's great. You can find Joseph. Just go to @JB Steinberg, @JB Steinberg. Lots of stuff that he posts up there so you can keep abreast. And if he's, other things that he sees that are published, in his work that other people are doing, bring to your attention. As I say, can't do better than this. We'll be back.